The French Navy is ready for an explosive conflict scenario. Japanese Prime Minister called for continued aid to Ukraine in a speech to the U.S. Congress. Slovakia's Prime Minister suddenly changed his message about the war in Ukraine. President of Russia and Belarus discussed bilateral economics and the conflict in Ukraine. Britain considers speeding up the process of delivering laser cannons specialized in destroying WAVs to Ukraine. France has shifted its navy's operational priorities from preventing drug trafficking and illegal fishing to preparing for a war. We are moving from a world where we are free to do as we please to a world where we feel threatened more often. Now we are training for other missions, especially high-intensity warfare, Rear Admiral Jacques Mallard, commander of the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle Strike Group, said in an interview with Politico published on April 11. Naval wars are becoming more and more likely, and French sailors are training to fight against those who want to destroy us. It is not illegal smugglers, nor people, want to fish illegally, Mr. Mallard added. According to the French admiral, in the context of the Russian Navy deploying forces in the Black Sea and the Houthi force in Yemen targeting ships associated with Israel, the US and the UK in the Red Sea, Western navies need to deal with it. With increasingly unregulated adversaries. That's where we're becoming more aggressive, or at least we're getting ready for that, Mr. Mallard emphasized. According to Mr. Mallard, the French and Italian navies will participate in a joint exercise in late spring, based on the Polaris program that simulates a naval battle. Mr. Mallard's comments came weeks after French President Emmanuel Macron raised the idea of deploying NATO troops in Ukraine. After Mr. Macron's statement, NATO allies quickly made clear their view that they had no intention of sending troops to Ukraine, and did not support direct involvement in the conflict. French Foreign Minister Séjourné also clarified President Macron's statement that the presence of Western troops in Ukraine may be necessary to provide certain types of aid, including mine clearance and military training. Ukrainian team, but that does not imply their direct participation in the conflict. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said France may send about 1,500 combat-ready soldiers to Ukraine. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu warned his French counterpart Sébastien Lecornu that deploying Paris troops to Ukraine would cause disaster for France. Mr. Shoigu said that France will create problems for itself if it decides to send troops to Ukraine. In a speech before the U.S. Congress, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida called for continued aid to Ukraine and warned about North Korea's nuclear program. According to ABC News, on April 11, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio gave a speech before the U.S. Congress. Mr. Kishida is the second Japanese head of state to ever speak before the U.S. Congress, after late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo in 2015. In his speech, Mr. Kishida called on the American people to believe in Washington's irreplaceable role in global affairs, and that Tokyo is working to improve its capacity to support its ally. To those who are tired of America's role in the international arena, America's leadership is indispensable. Without America's help, Ukraine's hopes cannot be sustained. How long before pressure from Russia? Without America's presence, how harsh will the Indo-Pacific region become, Mr. Kishida said. According to Mr. Kishida, what happened in Ukraine could happen again in East Asia, and called on the U.S. Congress to pass an aid package for Kyiv. Japan also recently announced $12 billion in aid to Ukraine through a NATO program, and pledged to continue maintaining economic sanctions against Russia. Japan will continue to stand side by side with Ukraine, Mr. Kishida emphasized. In his speech, Mr. Kishida also warned about North Korea's nuclear weapons program and challenges in East Asia. To join Washington in dealing with current challenges, Tokyo will make major changes in its defense policy. The world is facing a historical turning point, when freedom and democracy are threatened, when climate change and artificial intelligence are making the future uncertain. To face the challenge, Japan has changed over the years. From a reserved and recovering country after World War II, we have become a strong and dedicated ally, Mr. Kishida added. Slovak Prime Minister Fico called for a peaceful solution for Ukraine's territorial integrity, changing his message from previous pro-Russian statements. Russia's use of military force in Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico said on April 11, after meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart Denis Shmyhal. The Slovak Prime Minister added that Ukraine needs help and solidarity. He called for a peaceful solution to the Ukraine conflict, emphasizing that it must be a solution that respects the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Prime Minister Fico also supported Ukraine's desire to join the European Union (EU). There is no need to doubt Slovakia's support for Ukraine as well as Kiev's desire to become an EU member. We fully support it, Mr. Fico said. Mr. Šmihal thanked his Slovak counterpart for recognizing Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Prime Minister of Ukraine called the meeting with Mr. Fico a historic event for the two countries and two governments. Mr. Fico, 59 years old, has pro-Russian views and became Prime Minister of Slovakia in October 2023. One day after taking office, Mr. Fico announced an end to arms aid to Ukraine and protested against sanctions against Russia. The Prime Minister of Slovakia said in January that Ukraine is not an independent, sovereign country but is influenced and under complete control of the United States. Slovakia's previous pro-Western government once showed strong support for Ukraine. Slovakia was then the first NATO country to provide Soviet-made fighter jets to Ukraine during the conflict. According to Vietnam news agency correspondent in Moscow, on April 11, Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks with his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko at the Kremlin, in which the two sides discussed bilateral economic relations and the conflict in Ukraine. At the meeting, President Putin said that economic relations between Russia and Belarus have developed successfully. Growth in the first months of this year was even faster than last year, with more diversity and increased cooperation. Mr. Putin emphasized that in general, the situation is on the rise. Regarding the Ukraine issue, President Putin affirmed that Russia has never refused to resolve conflicts peacefully. Moreover, this is what Moscow wants to do. Referring to the upcoming conference on Ukraine in Switzerland, scheduled to take place next June, President Putin noted that Russia was not invited to this event, although according to him, peace cannot be achieved without the participation of Moscow. The Russian leader added that he would seek Mr. Lukashenko's role as an intermediary if there was a need for new negotiations. In addition, the Russian president also mentioned an important bilateral issue, the return to Earth of Belarusian female astronaut Marina Vasilevskaya, who was sent into space by Russia's Soyuz MS-25 spacecraft last month. He wants to soon transfer laser guns specialized in destroying drones to Ukraine. The British Army announced that it would consider speeding up the deployment of the Dragon Fire laser cannon so that this weapon could soon be in combat in Ukraine. The British Ministry of Defence announced on April 12 that the Fire Dragon laser cannon will be installed on London's warships in 2027, 5 years earlier than the original plan. The information was announced after the British Ministry of Defence applied a new procurement model to speed up the process of deploying advanced weapons to the field. The new model allows us not to have to wait until the assets are 99.9% complete to put them into operation. We just need to reach about 70% and then deploy it, then continue to develop, British Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said. He revealed that 2 major conflicts are currently the reason why Britain hastened the production progress of Dragon Fire. In the context of 2 major conflicts, one at sea and one in Europe, possessing a weapon that specializes in destroying drones will have a huge impact, this official said, apparently referring to the war in Ukraine and Houthi raids on cargo ships in the Red Sea. The British Defence Minister also said he would consider the possibility of further accelerating the launch of the laser cannon model so that Ukrainians can get their hands on it. 2027 is the expected date, but we will study to see if there is anything we can do to speed up the process further, he said. Drones, especially small suicide first-person perspective (FPV) models, are widely used weapons on the Ukrainian battlefield. They are cheap and easy to produce, but can destroy heavy equipment such as tanks and armored vehicles in just one strike. Russia and Ukraine also regularly launch unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, carrying explosive warheads to attack infrastructure deep in the enemy's territory, causing both sides to suffer a lot of damage. Each shot of Dragon Fire only costs about $13, much lower than the shells worth hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, of today's popular air defense systems. Anton Gyashenko, advisor to the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, said on March 15 that the country's military is ready to receive and test Dragon fire in real combat conditions, after the British Ministry of Defence released a video of testing a laser cannon model. This shows it has the ability to kill drones almost instantly. London has not yet given an official response to Kiev, but Mr. Sharp's latest statement seems to confirm that the country intends to transfer Dragon fire to Ukraine.